Welcome to Giving an Answer, the show dedicated to defending the historic Christian faith. I am your host, Harold Felder, and today the topic is philosophy and Christianity. And to talk with me about this topic, I have Professor Jason Reed. Let me tell you a little bit about Professor Reed. He has an undergraduate in philosophy from Iowa State University, a Master's of Art in Apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary. He's doctoral candidate at St. Louis University, and he's professor of philosophy at Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to the show, Jason.
It's glad to be here. Thank you.
What did I leave out?
Well, my family.
All right, see, you're good. A lot of guys have to tell that, you know.
No, well, I'm from the state of Iowa originally, and I grew up in a, Christian home and got saved in 1992 and got interested in philosophy. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then I met my wife, and she wasn't my wife then. Back in 97, her name's Holly. We've been married for 9 years. We have 3 girls, Lisa, age 7, Lisa, age 6, sorry, Lisa, Genevieve, age 4, and Mary, 21 months.
All right. So I guess we can get right to the topic then. Professor Reed, what is philosophy?
Well, what is philosophy is also a philosophical question. So probably the best way of answering the question is to look at how philosophy got started. Philosophy was started back in the 6th, 7th century BC by some Greeks who were unsatisfied with myths. They were tired of explaining seasons by saying, well, there's a reason why we have winter, fall, spring, summers, because a god dies and splits in half. And so what these Greek thinkers did was look to see how is it that reason or knowledge and evidence and truth can be helped to answer these sorts of questions. So, make a long story short, philosophy is a love of wisdom. This comes from the Greek philosopher Pythagoras. They asked him, "Are you wise?" He said, "Well, no, I'm not wise, but I'm a lover of wisdom." So philosophy is a love for truth, it's a love for wisdom, it's a love for knowledge.
Okay. Why is philosophy then important?
Well, it's very apropos that you're asking this topic because many Christians think that it's unimportant, and I was actually one of those Christians. When I got saved in '92, like most young Christians, you're going to be a missionary or a pastor. And so I went into religious studies at the university, and I had to take a philosophy class. And I thought the same thing. The philosophy isn't important. They're going to tell me that I don't know that the table, that this isn't here. You can't know anything. How do we know we're not just in the thumbnail, some great big giant? Anyway, those sorts of silly things. As I start to get into philosophy, and when I was taking my philosophy class, I came to find out that philosophy was important because philosophy asked the same questions that I was asking as a Christian. And as I started to study philosophy, I realized that there's a rich heritage of Christian philosophers, that it was important because it really helped me to sharpen my powers of thinking and enlarge my powers of thinking, and to learn that it isn't at odds with Christianity. And so it's important because every Christian, whether we like it or not, has certain assumptions, or as we say in philosophy, presuppositions. That's another thing about philosophy is important. You can learn big words. That's another thing too. Yeah, right. Yeah. So it became important because as a Christian, it really helped me to search out my own faith, to questions in the Bible. I had a lot of questions about the scriptures, and philosophy was important because it helped me understand these things. And philosophy is very much a tool and an instrument for understanding reality, and it helps a Christian understand their own faith better.
It helps a Christian understand his own faith better?
That's right.
How is that?
Well, historically, the Christian faith came on the scene roughly 600 years after philosophy had started. And so when the church spread out in the 1st and 2nd century, many of the converts were former heathens and pagans who had studied philosophy. And so from the very beginning, virtually the very beginning of Christianity, the Christians had sought to integrate philosophy. And they appealed to the philosophers in defending the Christian faith and defending the scriptures. And so Christianity was seen as a kind of philosophy. Christianity was seen as a way of living, as a way of life. And so from the inception, there was no controversy between a Christian who studied philosophy. And so Christianity has always tried to incorporate a philosophical outlook in their Christianity.
So historically, so I guess maybe you've already touched on it, but what's been a relationship historically between Christianity and philosophy?
Well, the early Christians, and maybe people don't know this, but the early Christians saw in Aristotle and Plato and the Neoplatonians and the Stoics and the Epicureans, they saw in the Greek minds.
You mentioned a whole lot of words there that no one...
Okay, sorry, these were Greek philosophers.
Okay.
Okay, and have you ever seen some movies, like what's that one movie? Princess Bride. They're mentioned in there. So Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates. These are great Greek thinkers. And our the early church fathers saw in them these great powers of thinking. They saw in them lots of truth. But as a Christian, they saw that Christianity, that the message of the New Testament, that Jesus Christ and the apostles had answers to the questions that the philosophers were raising. So historically, the Christians saw in a philosopher sort of a pre-Christian, someone who was asking questions that the Christians had answers to. Now what happened historically is that when modern mind became secular, and we'll get into that a little bit, when the mind became, believed that Christianity was hostile to thinking, historically that's when the break took place. That's when Christians began to see philosophy as something that was anti-Christian, non-Christian, as something that did violence to Christian truth. But up until roughly, 300-400 years ago, maybe even 500 years ago, Christianity has always used the Christian. It had always seen the philosopher as someone who was asking the same questions, but yet the Christians had the answer. So that's the kind of the neat relationship. The first Christians, and especially the medieval period, saw in the philosophers the same questions we were asking, but yet Jesus and his disciples and the apostles had the real answers.
Now that's an interesting point, because I've taken philosophy, and there are basically a few questions that have been asked throughout history. So you're saying now that these philosophers who, for generations or centuries, have asked these questions, that these Christians come on the scene and they have the answers for them. What type of questions were they asking, and what were the answers that Christianity provided?
Okay, well, just from my own personal experience, I think lots of people, that watching this show, and just people in general in our culture, want to know whether or not there is truth. They want to know, is there anything certain out there? Is there anything that's certain? Is God real? Does God exist? Do we survive the grave? I mean, is there immortality of our souls, or is the grave the final chapter in our lives? Is there right and wrong? Is there a way I'm supposed to live my life? Is there a way of living my life that will give me happiness? Or is that irrelevant? And so my own life, before I became a Christian, had these questions. Is there a God? How do I know there's such thing as heaven and hell? Do I survive the grave? Is there any truth? How to be wise? And so my own life, I was asking what I didn't know at the time was philosophical questions. And so what these questions do is they prepare a person for the gospel. Because if you're going to become a Christian, you have questions, right? You just can't believe that Jesus is the Son of God unless there's a God. You can't believe that Jesus Christ is the truth unless there's truth. You can't say that I know I'm going to heaven if there's not any knowledge. You can't say that Jesus Christ gives us the right way to live if there is no such thing as the right way to live. And so as I came to answer these questions on my own, I realized that the more questions I got answered from a philosophical viewpoint, it just raised more questions for me that the philosopher couldn't answer. And this is where Jesus Christ comes on the scene. When I met Jesus Christ, when I finally interacted with the God-man, that Jesus Christ is God incarnate, and he put the capstone on all the questions that I had. How do I know there's a God? Because he walked the shores of Galilee. How do I know that there is truth? Because truth was walking around in the flesh. How do I know there is a heaven? Because someone from heaven came to earth and told us about it. All these sorts of great things. So that's how the Christians don't have to worry about philosophy. It's not against us. As a matter of fact, it prepares us for Christianity itself, I would argue anyway.
That's very interesting, because it seems to me like, just hearing you explain what you just explained, is that man got to a point where he had questions. And it's almost like God is saying, okay, that's good. You have questions.
That's right. That's right.
Now I'm going to send you the answers. You're asking the right questions. I'm going to send you the answers. And people accepted them, I imagine, for a time, or maybe some did or some didn't. But I guess somewhere along the line we lost track, but I guess we'll get to that in a minute. But what type of, I imagine, since because of what you said, that there were Christian philosophers. So what were their contributions to philosophy? Because before I took philosophy, I didn't think that there was any such thing as Christian philosophy at first, because I thought that they were, antagonistic to one another.
Right. Well, probably the best example of what it means to be a Christian philosopher is St. Augustine. And then we'll touch a little bit on what we just previously talked about, the idea of Christianity and philosophy being partners. St. Augustine was a non-Christian. St. Augustine was a Christian philosopher living in the 3rd and 4th century. Arguably one of the greatest Christian minds ever. Raised in a Christian home, but he was a pagan intellectually. He started in the cult, the Manichaeans, and started in that cult for a couple of years.
What kind of cult is that?
Manichaeans believe that in a dualism, namely that good and evil are eternal things that have been in conflict for all eternity. And so what bothered St. Augustine was, where does evil come from? That's what bothered him, and he wanted to know the truth. So he searched around, and he was always confused because why am I on this voyage? Why am I searching for truth? I mean, the search for truth was not intelligible to him. He didn't even know why he was even looking for truth, let alone whether there is any. And when he went and became a professor, and started listening to the teachings of St. Ambrose, who was a Christian preacher, he saw in the Christian revelation, he saw in Jesus Christ, 2 answers. One is why he was asking. Why am I searching for truth? The reason he was searching for truth is because God had made him that way. And the reason he was searching for truth, the reason why God had made him that way, because man was meant to be on a path to find God, to find bliss. So it explains why you're looking and what it is you're looking for. And so the Christian faith has always seen the answers in this way, that the philosopher knows that he is looking. The philosopher knows what he's looking for, but he can't explain why he's looking or what it is that he's looking for. And so Christianity historically has seen Christianity's role, and as far as philosophy is concerned, playing that in that function, explaining to the non-believer, explaining to the philosopher, here's why you're looking, and here's the answer. Jesus Christ in the flesh to bring us in, no longer separated from God, but through the Son of truth, through the Son of wisdom, we can actually, and that's exactly what Augustine said. Augustine said this. He was bold to say that true philosophy is in the New Testament. True philosophy is Christian. So then that was that way for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah, somewhere along the line we lost our
Yeah, that's probably what we're going to talk about here pretty soon, I imagine.
Well, then is there anything incompatible then between philosophy and Christianity? It doesn't seem to be true philosophy the way that you explained it, but I mean, I don't know, because
how is it that now before you studied philosophy, you thought they were incompatible? How did I come to think this, right?
Yeah.
It's like there's a huge disconnect, right? Everything I've been saying in the first part of the show, it's like, where did you get this? Because everyone else seems like probably watching is, I never heard this before.
Right.
How's that the case? Well, good question. Here's the answer. What happened is that the Christians stopped doing philosophy. And the modern mind, there are 3 problems. Skepticism, those who believe that you can't know anything, we should just suspend judgment. We really can't know the truth. There are agnostics who say we can't know ultimate reality. We can't know if there is a God. We can't know if there's truth. And then the Darwinists or the evolutionists who believe that everything can be explained by natural selection and through science. And so here's what happened. Christianity claimed to explain lots of things for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Then, quote unquote, supposedly, modern man now is able to explain the questions better than the Christians could. And so what the Christians, they misunderstood what their role was in answering the skeptic, because Christians began to adopt the view that the reason why so many people weren't Christians is because they thought or they studied philosophy. And so they became very much suspicious of reason. They became suspicious of anything that wasn't biblical, explicitly biblical. The idea that you could study Aristotle and you could study Plato and get something out of that. The Christians became suspicious of this. And then here's the paradox, as reason advanced through science, through the modern mind, Christianity became less and less intellectual. So till we have today, namely, most people think that Christianity is incompatible with philosophy because they believe philosophy proves that Christianity is wrong, that philosophy proves